One of them is the rhetorical structure theory relations, their definitions. I haven't included their examples and so forth that are in the original copy that is on the canvas. And then there are several texts that we'll be looking at today. And finally, the third thing is, again, one of these mock tests. I printed out the RST relations because, as I mentioned to you on the exam, it will be open book, except you will not be able to use any electronic devices. So don't plan to, use your computer or other device. All right, it'll all have to be hard copies. So this I thought would be useful for you to have, and so I've printed it out. And today I'd like us to sort of be referring to it as we look at the various relations and try to make sense of what relation fits with what we're describing. I do want to emphasize that though the test, midterm test like that, is not open book. All right, that is closed book. Yes, of course, the multiple choice, short answer, true, false. I don't think you expect me to allow you to have open access to everything, right? It's a different reason why I give you the final exam as open book. It's analyzing, and I do, as I mentioned before, never look at a text as an island that is unrelated to other texts. And over the course of the semester, we are looking at a number of different texts and analyzing them, and that should be information you draw on. All right. The assignment, for any of you that were not here last week, just to make clear to you, the essay that you will be analyzing, the text that you will be analyzing is an IELTS exam essay for the task 2, where you're supposed to argue something. And that particular writing task will be what you will be analyzing, and each of you something along this line. And each of you has been assigned one of the essays. I hope you've looked at it already. And I hope you're thinking about how you're going to analyze it and so forth. As I mentioned last time, I also repeat here the clause-based analysis that will be due in week 8. Still quite a bit of time. And I don't think it should be very difficult to do that clause-based analysis. The rest of it will be something that you will submit later on, but I asked for the clause-based analysis early, as I said, so that I have a chance to let you know if you're on the wrong track. All right. So hopefully that will clear up any issues. And besides the analysis that you do, that will be carried out sort of on a weekly basis. At the end, then, it's April 24th. Seems like a long way away. Will be the commentary. You'll discuss the text, very much along the lines of what you do on your final exam. All right, where you are looking at the texture and the architecture and what contributes to the makeup of the text that you are analyzing, how it fits other texts within the same sort of register, and so on. Well, we are in week 6, and we are completing the rhetorical structure theory today. And last week, I left you with the analysis for the last 2 paragraphs, and I asked you to please take a look at that and please think about how you would analyze it. We did the first 2 paragraphs. There were 4 altogether. And you remember the text was what? It was the debate closing statement of this presidential candidate, Mitt Romney. And the two paragraphs that I've asked you to take a look at are these. All right, so let's take a look at my analysis, all right? And I've just written it out. 1032, America's going to come back. And for that to happen, we're going to have to, I'll read it to begin with. We're going to have a president who can work across the aisle. I was in a state where my legislature was 87% Democrat. I learned how to get along on the other side of the aisle. We've got to do that in Washington. Washington is broken. I know what it takes to get this country back. And we'll work with good Democrats and good Republicans to do that. All right, so let's take a look, if you would, please. Get those definitions of relations out. Take a look with me at condition. Does it fit? It's on the first page, the other side. Condition on the satellite. The satellite presents a hypothetical, future, or otherwise unrealized situation. What is the satellite here? We're saying America is going to come back. It is not yet realized. Going to. All right, so it satisfies that requirement. And the realization of the noun depends on sorry, I'm reading the wrong one. Where are we? Let's see. Realization, yes, of the nucleus depends on the realization of the satellite. All right. For that to happen, realization of the nucleus here for America to come back, well, this is what we're going to have to do. All right. So that seems to be reasonable. 1033, we're going to have a president who can work across the aisle. All right. So now, help me out here. What do you think would be the right relation here between 1033, 1033, let's say that, and the rest of it? Now, I've said that I think that this is the nucleus, but what would be an appropriate relation here? 1034 carries on by talking about, let's see, I was in his experience, right? I was in a state where my legislature was 87% Democrat. I learned to get along. So we're going to have a president who can work across the aisle. What about this? What do you think? Give me some suggestions. We're going to have a president that can work across the aisle. And then he goes on to tell his background, sort of why he would fit that particular purpose, why he would fit that particular task. What would be an appropriate relation? Go through them, look at them. Give me a suggestion. How does this all fit the goal here, which is to have somebody that can work across the aisle? Would you just say it out, please? Sorry? Elaboration. What sense would it be elaboration? Can you explain? I don't even put you on the spot. I'm grateful to have some feedback, all right? What made you think of elaboration?
Because, 1033 is that to have a president who can work across the aisle. So the fullest intent are elaborating on this point.
Satellite presents additional detail about the situation of some element of subject matter which is presented in the nucleus or inferentially accessible to the nucleus in one or more of the ways listed below. Members of a set. Instances of some abstract concept, some abstraction, parts of a whole, steps in a process, attributes of an object. Generalization specific. Well, to give your point, you could argue, I think, that generalization, we need someone who can work across the aisle, and here's the specific, me. All right, that's what he'd say. Very good. I think that fits quite well. So let's say that's elaboration. All right, let's go to 103435. What was that? That is his background, right? So the background to what's going to be said here in 1036. 1036, we've got to do that in Washington. How are we going to? I was in the state where my legislature was 87% Democrat. I learned how to get along on the other side of the aisle. All of that is going to be background. Well, let's take a look at background. Right there on the first page. The satellite. We're taking this 1034 and 35, his experience, increases the ability of the reader to comprehend an element in the nucleus. Well, you know what I thought background? Mainly it was because of this word. We've got to do that. What is that? You don't know what that is unless you've seen what came before it. To be able to work across the aisle. So that was the reason why I suggested that this would be the background. This one, 1034 and 1035. I was in a state where my legislature was 87% Democrat. I learned how to get along on the other side of the aisle. What's the relationship? Sort of a because, right? Because I was in this situation, I learned how. All right, so it's cause something, all right? So is this a volitional cause? I don't think so, because it's just his circumstance. He was working with a legislature. He had a legislature that was largely made up of the other political party. So I'd say it's non-volitional. Now let's take a look. Non-volitional cause. Did I get it right? This would be on the second page, the first side, top side. Non-volitional cause. The satellite, by means other than motivating a volitional action, so it's not volitional, caused the nucleus. Well, we're saying the nucleus. I learned how to get along. This is the situation. Well, that seems to fit then. Motivating without the presentation of S, reader might not know the particular cause of the situation. How come he was able to get along? Presentation of the nucleus is more central than the satellite to the writer's purpose, putting forth this combination. Well, this is clearly more important than his quality of being able to work with the other political parties. And let's see. 1036 and 1037. What's that? Well, we've got to do that in Washington. Washington is broken. How is that related? 1036 and 1037. We've got to do that. Because Washington is broken. Again, it's another case of non-volitional cause, all right? And you'll notice that I say it's cause. Why not result? Cause the satellite, by means other than motivating a volitional action, caused the nucleus, the satellite. This, Washington is broken, caused this situation where we've got to do something about it. and 38 and 39. I felt these were just sort of joint two ideas. 38, I know what it takes to get this country back, and we'll work with good Democrats and Republicans to do that. This is the means of achieving it. He knows how to do it, and they'll work together to get it done. That's the means of being able to achieve it. What have we just been doing? We've been mapping out what we are suggesting is the way to understand this text, how it's put together, how it's coherent. In a way, we are trying to reconstruct what was the intention of the writer. Now, what have we come up with? What have I represented here? What I've represented here is my interpretation. Now, perhaps you will agree with me. Perhaps you might disagree with me. That's possible. The fact that you can agree or disagree does not invalidate it. Instead, what we have to realize that this is a hypothesis. How else can we say what something means? It is my interpretation. It is my theory. It is my hypothesis. Well, how can I persuade you that this was right? I went through trying to show you through the relations, showing you why I came up with what I did. So that when you said, for example, elaboration, did it fit the definition of the relation here? And yes, we could see that, yes, it could qualify. And so this is sort of the means by which we allow to some intersubjective interpretation. You're coming up with a theory, a hypothesis. And what do you do with a hypothesis? You prove it. You give evidence for it. The evidence is what is laid out here in terms of the relations. Otherwise, it's just ad hoc, but it isn't ad hoc. It's based on the relations and how they're defined. Let's do one more. This is the last one. 1040. This nation is the hope of the earth. Well, it seems like that's a statement thrown out there, but it's to prepare. I took this preparation. Now, again, I'm going to ask us to go and look up that definition of that relation. Let's look up preparation. One fault that I have with their presentation here, that it's not alphabetical. That would certainly help, you know. You have to really look through them to find it. Preparation, where is it? Let's see. First page, over, leaf at the top, preparation. Again, let's take a look. The satellite precedes the text. Okay, yes, it precedes it. And it tends to make the reader more ready, interested, or oriented for reading the nucleus. This nation is the hope of the earth. It's meant to get you willing to read what's going to follow. Okay, so that fits. That's reasonable. Okay, 141, 104, 50. All right. 41 and 42. We've been blessed by having a nation that's free and prosperous, thanks to the contributions of the greatest generation. They've held a torch to the world for the world to see, the torch of freedom and the hope and opportunity. Now, I said it was means. 141. We have a nation free and prosperous thanks to the contribution of the greatest generation. That means the previous generation, the older people, all right? How did they do it? Well, they held a torch for the world to see. So that's why I considered it means. Well, let's take a look. Again, let's take a look at the definition for means. It's on the second page at the top, the front page. Satellite presents a method or instrument which tends to make the realization of the nucleus more likely. Well, I take it as an action, 42, in the sense they held a torch. This was the means. The torch was the instrument, all right, by which they were able to achieve this. So we have the greatest generation here. And what is in 43 through 50? Well, 43, now it's our turn. So we have two sides. Greatest generation, what they accomplished, and now it's our turn. Okay, so 42 through, 43 and 44. Let's take a look. 43. Now it's our turn to take that torch. I'm convinced we'll do it. This was a bit difficult for me, 43 and 44. I'm convinced we'll do it. You can see I wrote in here means, all right, that whether or not I want you to realize that even when I do this, I sometimes am not sure. It's not a clear-cut thing sometimes. Because what is the relationship here? In the sense that 43, now it's our turn to take that torch. I'm convinced we'll do it. What do you think? Any other suggestions? Well, let's leave that. 43 through 44. 43, now it's our turn to take that torch. I'm convinced we'll do it. This 44. Oh, I'm sorry. What did I say? 41 and 42. Oh, that was excuse me, my fault. This we did explain. We did see it was the torch. We're actually working here. It was motivation is what I said. Motivation because it was sort of, to me, it was like, let's do it. And sort of that idea, that's why I took it as motivation. Let's look up that motivation. First page at the bottom. Comprehending the satellite increases the reader's desire to perform the action in the nucleus. 43. Let's see, now it's our turn to take that torch, and it increases does it increase our desire to perform that action that is in the nucleus? Are we more motivated? Yeah, I think so. I think it's motivated to, yes, take up that torch. Let's do it. 45. We need strong leadership. That's the issue. That's the problem. And he represents himself in 46 through 50 as the solution. '46 through 50, I take as the nucleus because here is where he's really wanting to impress people that they should choose him. And so we have 46. What's 46? I'd like to be that leader with your support. I'll work with you. 47, 48, I'll lead you. So this is, again, the means. How is he going to be that leader? Well, he will work with us. He will lead us. And finally, 49 and 50, I'll lead you in an open, honest way. I ask for your vote. I ask for your vote. This is really rather the critical part. And I'd like to be the next president of the United States to support and help this great nation to make sure that we all together maintain America as the hope of the earth. Again, I said it was the motivation. Why vote for him? All right, you will have on the exam also essay questions. All right. This is why it's good for you to be thinking about, it's not just analyzing text, it's also thinking about the theory behind it as well. By the way, I am using the Zoom to create the video, but I noticed none of you look at the videos. Did you get the links? All right. Do you want me to keep on doing it? But you don't, none of you look at it. I can tell the numbers, all right?
Download it.
Download it? Okay, I'll keep doing it. But it's, I was asking myself why am I doing this? Because I have to get the Zoom video and then I chop it up into parts and remove the gaps and things like that. And I thought, well, you don't even cares. So why I bother? Okay. Hopefully, maybe when it comes time to your exam, it would be useful to go back and look at the old videos, all right? Whatever. I want us to take, and I just take a moment. This was the question. And I've used this question before, and not necessarily will I use it again, all right? Explain and illustrate with examples what Halliday refers to as theme, structure, and thematic progression. Also explain and illustrate with examples how theme, structure, and thematic progression contribute to the method of development of the text. Okay. How does the text develop? But one of the things I think that as we look at the rhetorical structure theory and so forth, we see that the role of theme can be quite important. But I wanted to give you an illustration of why theme is important with an example that comes from Halliday. Halliday, he considered Darwin's Origin of Species, the concluding paragraph, to be so momentous. This was the final paragraph, all right, in The Origin of Species. There is grandeur in this view of life, with its several powers having been originally breathed into a few forms or into one. And as whilst this planet has gone cycling on according to fixed law of gravity, from so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful have been and are being evolved. What Halliday said was this. He says, this resounding lexicogrammatical cadence brings the clause, the sentence, the paragraph, the chapter, the book to a crashing conclusion with a momentum to which I can think of no parallel elsewhere in literature. Perhaps only Beethoven has produced comparable effects, and that in another medium altogether. So Halliday was so impressed with this. So he wanted to find out what was it that was sort of behind it. What gave it that momentous quality? He said this, I do not know how long it took Darwin to compose these two paragraphs, or whether he reflected consciously on their construction as he was doing it. I imagine not. I certainly had no idea when starting the analysis of what I was going to find. I always find this interesting because you'd think when Halliday would analyze a text, he'd know directly where to go and what to look for. And he admits here, I had no idea when starting the analysis of what I was going to find. So what do we begin with? Well, let's see what he said. I had the sense of a remarkable and powerful piece of writing. As the climax to a remarkable and powerful book. And it struck me that something of the effect of these two paragraphs might lie in the patterning of the theme of the meaning. That is the textual component of the forever thoughts. So he starts out with an assumption. His sort of hypothesis, theme will be significant here. And he proceeds then to analyze it. He summarizes now this is the last two paragraphs of which I showed you before was just the final part. Halliday summarizes what occurs as theme throughout the final two paragraphs. He identifies several categories or threads, so to speak. These aren't the exact words. These are what he's saying was sort of what was used as theme. You know what theme is, right? What occurs initially in the clause, right? So you take every clause and look at what occurs initially. And what he was saying was that this can be identifiable then in certain categories. And so the categories he identifies are authorities, the phenomena of species, inhabitants and groups, life forms and endowments, variation, sources, law, war of nature. Okay, so he identifies these categories, or we could call them threads. And what was occurring as theme would fit into one of these categories. Likewise, he looks at what occurs as new. What would occur toward the end of the clause? And again, he identifies what categories these would fit into. Explanation, the process of evolution, transmission, procreation, time, past, future, ennoblement, law, natural selection. All right, so he identifies these categories. Now, take a look. This is the final closing clause, a sentence in the text. There is grandeur in this view of life with its several powers, having been originally breathed into a few forms or into one. And that, whilst this planet has gone cycling on according to the fixed law of gravity, from so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, have been and are being evolved. What we are going to see now is that what occurs as theme and what occurs as new is all those threads come together in this final sentence. For example, there's grandeur in this view of life. Well, that would be ennoblement. With its several powers, we have life forms and endowments. Having been originally breathed into transmission, procreation. A few forms or into one, inhabitants and groups. And that's whilst this planet has gone cycling on time, past and future, according to the fixed law of gravity, laws, from so simple a beginning, the sources, endless forms, variation, most beautiful and most wonderful, again, ennoblement, have been and are being evolved. All of those threads that work their way through the final two paragraphs all come to this, how do they describe this crashing conclusion in the last sentence? All of it brought to a conclusion. Halliday also points out that phonologically, the fact that there is this break, have been and are being, there's a break in the rhythm. He causes you to pause. And in the pause, reinforced by the commas and so forth, puts that final emphasis on that last word. It is art. It is verbal art, but it is science. This is what is extremely, yes, profound. Now, what we can see is that the basis for that is the use of certain resources in language. And one of those resources is what you put in theme. And what progresses through the text has choices of theme and choices of new. And all of those come together. Theme, choices of new, choices of what to begin with. These are all leading to the text as the text unfolds. Halliday writes this. He says, Darwin's Origin of Species is a product of the impact between an intellectual giant and a moment in the space-time continuum of our culture with all the complexity of meaning that implies. In the next 2 weeks, in the next 2 lectures, we will be talking about verbal art and verbal science. How the resources of language are being put to use for innovation, for creation. And we see both of those, innovation and creativity, sometimes they occur together. Okay, suppose you ask the question was asked you, explain and illustrate with examples why you agree or disagree with the statement that systemic functional linguistics offers a much more comprehensive view of language than rhetorical structure theory. How would you argue? What's the difference between them? How does systemic functional linguistics offer a much more comprehensive view of language than rhetorical structure theory? If I were looking at this, I would be looking at it from the standpoint of, well, what does systemic functional grammar give us? Halliday writes this, what is important is that we should be able to use the same theory and method of linguistic analysis. You should be able to apply the same approach, the same, as he puts it, grammatics. Why that word grammatics? What does it look like? Linguistics, right? The grammatics. What he's saying is that it's in the grammar. And when Halliday talks about in the grammar, what does he mean? It's in the choices of how we realize meaning. Choices in terms of transitivity. Choices in terms of theme. Choices in terms of interpersonal meaning. We should be able to apply the same method of linguistic analysis, the same grammatics, whatever kind of text or subtext we are trying to interpret. Whether Tennyson or Darwin, Mother Goose, or the scientific theory. Otherwise, Halliday says this, if we simply approach each text with an ad hoc do-it-yourself kit of private commentary, we have no way of explaining their similarities and their differences, the aesthetic and functional values that differentiate one text from another, or one voice from another within the frontiers of the same text. Yes, systemic functional grammar gives us a view that is in some ways, we might argue, more objective, because it is based on grammar. We've been looking at rhetorical structure theory, and certainly it does give us some way of understanding what the text is doing. But at the heart of it, we need grammar. We need to know how meaning is realized. And you'll remember this quote from Halliday, by thinking grammatically, what can we do? We can know how a text comes to be what it does. Just as we saw illustrated with Halliday's analysis of Darwin's last 2 paragraphs of Origin of Species, how a text comes to be valued. Why does it come to be valued the way it does? Aesthetically, as art, and functionally, achieving its purpose. When we say aesthetically and functionally, when we take a look at Romney's closing statement, we're not looking at it aesthetically. We're looking at it in terms of its functional value. Does he get people to vote for him? That's what he wants to achieve. It's not meant to be art. But Darwin's, in a way, that's what's curious about the origin of species. It sort of crossed over. It was both. We are interested in texture. Now, how do we define texture? It is something that is cohesive. Cohesive what? What gives something cohesion? Patterning. And if we're talking about patterning, what kind of patterns are we talking about? Choices, patterning of choices. What kind of choices are we talking about? Choices about relate to the system of transitivity. What process do you use? Who will be the initiator? Who will be the affected? What will occur first in the clause? What will appear later? How else are we going to be able to understand the text? These are choices that are made. And on this basis, we have an understanding of the architecture. How a text means something in a coherent way. You see, the more coherent the text, the easier it is to analyze in terms of rhetorical structure theory. The more coherent the text. Now, how do you make a coherent text? You have to signal that coherence. Well, it's about 1:45, and before I begin this one, we're going to take a look at some speeches and look at what gives us the clues as to how the text is understood. I'm going to be playing his Hu Jintao when he visited the state visit. It is translated. One thing I find interesting when we listen to the video, where does the translator come in? When does Hu Jintao pause and stop and let the translator do his job, the translation? That is going to give us some indication of what? Where are the breaks in the text? Where is it supposed to be a complete enough thought that the translator can take over? Well, that is going to help us in some respects. That's one thing. But that shows that we do infer, we do have some idea of what fits. What are the parts? What is the word that I've been using? What are the functionally significant spans of text? And that is clearly understood in looking at the role of the translator. Okay, let's take a break. And if we could come back in about 5 to the hour, according to this call.